All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. I'm Sasha Wolf, recording once again from the home base on the Upper West Side, New York City, and I'm joined, as usual, virtually by my friend and producer, the David O. Selznick of the podcasting world. Look it up, people. Just look it up. David O. Selznick. Look it up.
I'm looking it up.
No, are you really?
Yes.
Oh, man. All right, what if I had said Louis B. Mayer?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Really?
Well,
that's better?
No, but I looked up David O. Selznick, and now, of course, I knew who David O. Selznick was. It just didn't click when you said it.
But
I know by reputation.
I mean, David O. Selznick is just a better name to sort of use as a joke than Louis B. Mayer. Yeah. Although Louis B. Mayer's name, of course, is in MGM Pictures, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer.
Of course.
Golden? Or
Goldwyn.
Goldwyn. Metro.
Yeah.
See, even I don't know. This was the golden age of cinema.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Started in the silent era.
This joke sucked. Okay, you know why David O. Selznick is on my brain?
Why?
I spent the weekend... Okay, this is so boring. I'll say it as quickly as possible. I spent the weekend reorganizing everything in my apartment, not my clothes, not my kitchen, but everything from like office supplies to photo dealer supplies to old business records, books, what else? More. Taking all things that need to be organized and all possible places to put things, storage places, closets, etc. And I redid the entire thing. First of all, I have cuts and scrapes and bruises all over my hands and arms because I was doing this by myself. But I got to all my old film books.
Wow.
And I'm like an anti-hoarder, but this is like one thing I still have not been able to get rid of because I have this incredible library of like, I think I have like 4 biographies on Hitchcock alone. You know, I just have like all these incredible, everything from like how to make movies to all these like biographies of people. Anyway, so I have like old-timey cinema in my head. I mean, I have like the complete works of screenplays by Preston Sturges. Okay, look that up too, people.
It sounds like you went deep into the archives.
I mean, I was literally reorganizing everything because it just needed to be done just based on sort of ease of use and what I use the most and what's the most accessible. But I will tell you, I had one quandary where when I got to all my old film stuff, I also have not the complete, but I had a book of, I think, 5 screenplays of Woody Allen.
Oh.
So I was like, okay.
What do you do with those?
I threw it out.
Yep.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
You know, he had a very specific style at one point, like in the late 70s into the 80s.
Right.
When he made Annie Hall in Manhattan and numerous other films, the great Gordon Willis was his cinematographer, the great Gordon Willis, who also shot The Godfather. I mean, just like one of the all-time great cinematographers. And shot The Parallax View. Gosh, so many amazing things. All the President's Men. And then Woody Allen changed cinematographers. But anyway, he had this great style that he worked with Gordon Willis that I really loved. And I used to really study that work. Well, anyway, okay, so I don't know. What are you supposed to do? It's confusing. So I threw it out.
You got that darkness out of your life.
I got the dark.
Yes.
I removed the darkness. Not that Alfred Hitchcock was a saint, but anyway.
Right. Right.
Slippery slope. But I didn't throw out. I'm never throwing out my Alfred Hitchcock books. I just can't do it. All right. So how was that for a digression?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, did you expect in a million years that that's where we were going to go? No.
No, movie talk, classic cinema
Yeah.
talk with Sasha Wolf.
I love Turner Classic Movies, by the way.
I bet.
So fun. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's I've got my final black and white photo class tomorrow. I had my last photo 2 class last week, and it was great. It was it feels, I'm hoping it's kind of the end of this moment of trying to figure out how to do everything starting last spring. And I'm hoping in the fall there'll still be some hybrid classes and some remote learning, but I think that part of it is figured out, and I'm looking forward to having way more in-person courses in the fall.
I'm sure.
Yeah. But I feel like we all went through something together as a class in my 2 classes. And so, it's definitely going to be more of a celebration tomorrow.
Yeah. You were like the equivalent. Okay, this is a ridiculous. I can't even believe I'm going to. This is what came to mind for some reason. This is like, I have for some reason grand cinema in my head. So I was thinking you were like.
The Cecil B. DeMille.
No, like your ship sank. Your ship sank and you all got on a lifeboat and you were adrift together and then you were finally rescued. Like when you said we've been through something together.
Yeah.
But that's
Absolutely.
That's a movie.
No, it really feels like it.
The sharks were circling.
Oh, all kinds of things were circling.
Some people didn't make it.
Oh, I think that's probably...
No. Dial it back. Too dark. So we had I think this week's episode is excellent.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a real treat for our listeners.
Yeah, it's a conversation with Gregory Harris, who's the Associate Curator of Photography at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. And it is a serious behind-the-scenes look at what it means to be a curator. Everything from how exhibitions are decided upon to how acquisitions are made.
Yeah, there's so much interesting information that someone like me didn't know in terms of the workings of museums, but also Greg Harris has when you have a more kind of back and forth, he has some interesting ideas as well about where the museum could go next, and I thought that part of the conversation was great, as well as when you ask Greg about, are dealers annoying?
Oh, yeah.
It's a very sweet conversation.
Yeah, ask him if he gets 1,000 million emails from people like me trying to get him to acquire our artists and how annoying we are.
It's a really good conversation. And the whole, that whole process of acquisitions is so interesting.
Yeah. No, I'm, first of all, Greg is he's really incredibly smart, super articulate, and really charming. I am very fond of him, and it was just a total joy to spend that time. And I always say this about the podcast, but it is to a large extent, me sort of hanging out with someone. I sort of get to have longer on the phone talking to people than I often do. So, I do talk to Greg, but often I am trying to get him to buy something.
Well, and for anyone who's ever dropped off work at a museum or made their own, went to a portfolio review of any kind or anything like that. I think what Greg says will be, really good to hear.
Yep. No, I agree. All right. Well, because I took up so much time talking about reorganizing my apartment, why don't we get to it? So, Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
My pleasure. And here's your conversation with Greg Harris.
Gregory Harris, Associate Curator of Photography at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sasha.
It's so great. You're my first curator, I feel like, on the podcast. I feel like it's It's just so fantastic. First of all, I'm just so happy to get a chance to hang out with you this afternoon because I like you, and I love talking with you, personally. But I really, really feel like we're gonna, or you're going to provide the listeners of the podcast with, real behind the scenes look at the museum world. I know that people, a lot of artists just have no idea how shows are put together, how acquisitions are decided upon. So really looking forward to getting to all that with you. But let's start as we always do, if you don't mind, just telling the listeners a bit about, who you are, where you come from, and how you wound up at the High.
Sure. So I grew up in Western Massachusetts in a little town in the Connecticut River Valley. And I got into photography kind of the ways that I think a lot of people do. My dad gave me a camera when I was about 14, and I was just hooked on taking pictures. I ended up moving to Chicago after high school, and I studied photography at Columbia College there. It was an amazing program, with fantastic faculty, like people like Dawood Bey and Paul D'Amato. And I was really immersed in, learning how to make pictures and make a life as a photographer. I kind of always intended that I would be like a globetrotting photojournalist or documentary photographer. But toward the end of that program, I kind of started realizing that there was just something about, the possibilities of being a photographer that I maybe was not all that well suited to it. I was, looking around at my classmates and just kind of seeing like the people who were really incredible photographers. Like you knew that they had something special, and I was, perfectly good at making pictures, but I didn't think I had that thing that all these other people had, or that drive to really do it. But I was realizing that I was so much more drawn to having conversations with people about their pictures and looking at other people's pictures and trying to make sense of them and help them make sense of them, that I thought that maybe there was another path forward. And it happened that I got an on-campus job at the Museum of Contemporary Photography, sitting at the front desk and helping them install shows. This incredible museum that was right in the same building where I was taking all my photo classes. And as I was having this realization that maybe I wasn't cut out to be a photographer, I discovered museums, and it changed my life. I just kind of went off in this whole different direction. I, around the same time, got an internship working at the Art Institute of Chicago just up the street. So I spent a couple of days at MOCP and a couple of days at the Art Institute while I was finishing up my final semester at Columbia. And it was just this amazing time getting to see like how a museum worked and what a curator does and how a show comes together, how curators interact with artists. And it was just, I was hooked. I wanted to do nothing else. At that point, I knew exactly that was the path I wanted to be on. And I had this experience my first day at the Art Institute. I was working with Kate Bassard, and she said, we're going to do this show called The Concerned Photographer. And it's going to be about socially and politically engaged photographs, throughout the 20th century. And she pulled out a couple boxes from storage and said, here's a box of Lewis Hine photographs. Here's a box of Walker Evans photographs. You got these easels here. Take them out, look at them, decide what you think should be in the show. I have to run to a marketing meeting. I'll be back in about an hour, and then we'll talk about your choices. And it was just, I got to move the pictures around. I got to look closely at them. It was my 22-year-old mind was blown in that moment, and there's just no going back for me. So I spent about a year interning at the Art Institute, and then I graduated. I got a job working on the installation crew at the Art Institute. So I spent a year hanging exhibitions, moving objects around in storage, which just gave me another insight into other parts of the museum. And then I enrolled in the School of the Art Institute's graduate art history program, and I was still working at the museum. I had 4 or 5 different jobs at the Art Institute while I was going to school. I was working in the museum. I, in addition to being an installer, I was a collection photographer. So my job was to go through the entire collection of 25,000 photographs and digitize every single one of them. So I spent 2 years taking pictures of pictures and getting to know that collection. When that job ended, I moved over to the library, and I was shelving books in the library, which I have, anyone who knows me knows that I have this kind of unhealthy obsession with photo books. So being in a lot, in an incredible art library surrounded by that was also an amazing experience. And then around the time that I was wrapping up grad school, I got a special assignment to be a guest curator, and I got to curate an exhibition out of the photography collection there. So I had this incredible experience for about 3 years where I was taking classes, learning the history, the theory of modern contemporary art, but also working in a museum. So I was getting the kind of intellectual training and the hands-on experience at the same time, which, couldn't have asked for something better than that. So I curated this one show at the Art Institute. And then I was incredibly fortunate and got a job working at the DePaul University Art Museum 3 weeks before I graduated. So I knew I was going to have somewhere to go as soon as I finished school. It was a very small university museum. I was the third staff member to join the museum. And because it's a small museum, you have to do a lot of different things. I was hired as the assistant curator, but they're like, well, you're going to work on shows, but we also need you to hang shows. If you can do graphics, we need you to do the exhibition graphics. You can help out with grant writing. You're going to be working in the collection. Basically, anything that needs to be done at the museum, we need you to participate in it. And I was like, well, that's great, because I had all these weird jobs at the Art Institute. I know how to do all of these things. So I did everything from hanging the pictures, curating the shows, writing the labels, scouting artwork for acquisition, to changing the light bulbs when they needed to be changed. I was there for about 5 years, and the DePaul Art Museum wasn't specific to photography, but I managed to fit photography into just about every single project I worked on at the museum. And what's great about a university museum is that they have a built-in audience of students and faculty, and so you have to try to find ways to make your shows tie in with the curriculum at the museum. So you have to think very creatively, and it's not just about an aesthetic experience. You have to think about pedagogy and how the work can be a teaching tool. So I was there for about 5 years, doing all of the jack of all trades kind of museum work, and I knew I wanted to focus on photography. That had always been my passion, and a job at the High Museum in Atlanta opened up. And I was, really hesitant to leave Chicago. I'd been there for 14 years. I loved the city. I had such a great network of colleagues and friends. But, jobs being a photography curator are so few and far between that when I was offered the job at the High, there was no way that I could say no. It was a new position that was created. The photography department was expanding. They were starting to plan new galleries for the photo collection. So there was all of this great opportunity to work with, a truly amazing photography collection that, in a program that was, really on the rise. So I got to the High, and 2 weeks after I got to the High, my boss told me that he was leaving for another job. So I took this job thinking I was going to have a mentor, and then suddenly I'm all on my own. And I ended up in a de facto way running the department for almost 3 years. So it was a wild time because we expanded the photo galleries. I got to plan, this new reinstallation and these new galleries and how we were going to use the space. I did a number of shows. I did a show with Paul Graham. I did a show with Mark Steinmetz. I did a show with Amy Elkins. The very first show I worked on was with Thomas Struth, which was kind of mind-blowing to have that as an introduction to a new museum. But I've been at the High for almost 5 years now. It's been kind of a wild ride. I'm no longer, the de facto head of the department. I have a great colleague now, Sarah Kennel, who came on close to 2 years ago, and we're trying out all kinds of things at the department right now.
So, you and I were joking around before we started recording about, you're on the younger side for a curator who sort of had the career you've had, but, it's just sort of so amazing that you started basically curating while you were still in school. And so you just got out of the gate so fast. And yeah, I just really admire that. I think I was the opposite. I was sort of more in the late bloomer. So I'm sort of amazed by people like you.
I was pretty lucky to figure out what I wanted to do really young and have the opportunities to really pursue that.
Yeah, no, it's really amazing. Before I get into sort of specific questions that I sort of referenced earlier about collecting and planning exhibitions, maybe just explain a little bit for people who haven't been to the High, because the High is really an incredible museum, and you guys did a big sort of expansion. Was it Renzo Piano, who designed the expansion?
So there are two main parts of the High's building, the High's facility. One was designed by Richard Meyer and opened in 1983, and it's this incredible building that has a huge atrium. There's a big silhouette wall drawing in there, and then we have these zigzagging staircases. It's an impressive space. And then Renzo Piano designed an expansion that was completed in 2005, and it about tripled the size of the museum. So it's a great facility with their landmark. They're landmark architectural buildings that the High Museum was on a postage stamp at one point. So they're really wonderful spaces that we have to work with. It's the biggest art museum in Atlanta. There are a couple other smaller museums here. There's the Atlanta Contemporary and the Museum of Contemporary Art Georgia, but the High is really the only art museum that is kind of focused on a broad sweep of art from around the world.
It's really lovely. I mean, I can be very critical of museums, of the physical space of museums, where I often feel slightly claustrophobic, or I'm not really enjoying the way I'm sort of being ushered from one space into another. I can get quite cranky about the way spaces flow often in museums. But the first time I was at the High, and by the way, it's funny that it was 2005 that the Renzo Piano space was completed, because in my mind it was much more recent, because I remember being down there and going through the space and someone telling me that it was recently completed. So now I realize how long ago that was when I was first down there. Anyway, but I do love those galleries, and I find them just breathtaking and really, really wonderful spaces to look at art in. I think that, they were just so beautifully designed.
Yeah, the proportions are really nice. They've got 15-foot ceilings throughout most of the space.
Yeah.
There's fantastic natural light throughout the entire building, which is great for showing paintings, but terrible for showing photographs.
Yeah, but it feels great. And those, it's those high ceilings and the natural light that I really love. So even if it's a little challenging when you're dealing with reflection in glass, I think it's a much better experience. But anyway, I'm taking us off on a tangent. So let's get to it. So
yeah.
We could sort of use, I'll just let you sort of decide what show to sort of use as an example. But I really, really want you to talk about how a show comes to fruition, how it's decided upon, and then how it sort of all happens. So I don't know, is Steinmetz show or the Paul Graham show, or, whichever. Yeah.
So the exhibitions come together in a number of different ways. Sometimes we curate shows entirely or almost entirely from our collection. So we'll have a particular strength, for example, photography of the American South. And we'll put together a show built around that idea using work that we have in the collection. We have to rotate the galleries every 6 months because photographs are sensitive to light. If you leave them up too long, they get damaged. So we're constantly coming up with new exhibitions, and using these different parts of the collection are ways that we program our space. The High also is somewhat distinct in that we have a number of deep pockets of monographic holdings by artists. So we have something like 500 photographs by Eugene Atget, over 100 photographs by Harry Callahan, and the same with William Christenberry and Clarence John Laughlin. So there's monographic shows that we can do right out of our collection. Another way that we put together shows, we'll have an idea, for some kind of theme, and we'll go out and we'll find the work. We borrow it from collections, we borrow it from artists, we borrow it from other museums, and we build the idea in that way. An example of that is a show that I worked on, actually collaborated on it with our curator of folk and self-taught art. And it was about these two photographers and a writer who traveled through the South visiting self-taught artists during the 1970s and 1980s. And they made portraits of all of these artists at this moment when they were really not taken seriously. These are people like Thornton Dial and Howard Finster, Sam Doyle, but they were making incredible work almost entirely in obscurity. And these guys set out to document their lives and tell their stories. And so we paired the photographs that the photographers made with work by all of these artists that we had in the collection. And there were these amazing portraits. And someone just approached us and said, they wrote a manuscript for this book. They never published it. I'm going to publish this book. Do you guys want to do a show? You have a collection that would be great with it. So we built a show kind of around that idea of traveling through the South, and looking at other artists and trying to celebrate them and tell their stories.
Do you guys, can I ask you, do you guys think about, or how do you think about, I'm sure you do think about it, how do you think about the folks who are going to come to the museum and, what their interests might be? So how do you balance introducing people to Paul Graham versus a show of photography of the American South that may be more enticing because it may feel more familiar to the people in Atlanta?
I mean, we're always thinking about audience and kind of how we want to tell a particular story, or what's the idea that we want to dig into, that we want to either bring a different perspective to our audience to kind of think about the world or a topic or something, or culture in a different way. The Paul Graham show, for example, which is a traveling exhibition. So that's the other way that shows come in, is that we will essentially we pay a fee to another museum or another organization, and they send us all the work and the basic structure and text for the show, and then we figure out how to make it work in our space, and we make some adjustments to kind of fit our style and our preferences. But with the Paul Graham show, what appealed to me so much about that is the High has been collecting and showing documentary photography for decades, and so our audience in some ways is already familiar with that way of looking at the world and kind of telling these stories about various topics. But all the work that we had shown up to that point had mostly been done in a very traditional and conventional way. And Paul has created this way of making pictures that is a really smart blend of classic documentary photography and conceptual approaches to the medium that not only make you think about the subject or the topic that he's thinking about, but they also make you think about how you see those things and how photography is complicit in the way that you frame the world, the way you experience the world, and the way that you understand these topics. So it's very self-conscious about the process of looking at and making photographs. And I thought that would be a really interesting twist to bring to an audience, to really deconstruct how a photograph works and how a photograph is made, while at the same time making you think about issues around racial injustice, inequality, things of that nature. So it was kind of a way of bringing in two different ways of thinking about photography and making photography, but it was somewhat familiar, and it wasn't going to be coming totally out of left field, that we were going to be bringing a conceptual approach to the medium.
Do you guys have a sense of how your audience is receiving the work and responding to the work? I mean, obviously you're not walking through the galleries asking people, hey, do you like this? But how do you gauge that?
Well, we have docents who give tours, and so they're interacting with the audience on a regular basis. And whenever we do a show, we do a docent training, and so we walk through the exhibition with the docents, and they often tell us, oh, well, when you did this show, so-and-so said this or so-and-so said that. So you get feedback from the docents. People fill out surveys. Sometimes I'll be walking through the galleries and I have my badge on, and someone will stop me and they'll just want to talk about something, or they want to ask a question. They have no idea if I curated the show or not. I'm just, an employee of the museum, but they're like, you work here, you must know something about it. And so sometimes those conversations actually do happen in the space. But there aren't a lot of formal mechanisms in place for getting that kind of feedback. So I try to just ask people who I know, like, did you see this show? What did you think? Like, is this working for you? And, the other thing is that, putting together an exhibition is a very collaborative process. So we're working with people from the education team, and
That's interesting. Yeah.
Where they're helping us craft the structure of the show. They're giving us a lot of input on the labels, saying like, well, what are you writing there? Like, isn't going to make sense. Or the thing that you're missing is this. So make sure you address that. That phrase or that term is far too jargony. The general audience is not going to understand that.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Think
I
about it
didn't
in a
know
different
that.
way.
Yeah. That's
so
really interesting.
There are all kinds of voices that come into an exhibition as it's being developed. We have a lot of our education team works with schools and teachers, and so they give us a lot of feedback based on what the classes have said and how students have responded. So usually, like going into a show with some shows, if they're really complex, or they're maybe addressing a topic that is very challenging, we may convene some kind of panel or put together a community group to help us think through some of the ideas where we have some blind spots, or we'll convene various scholars for a scholars day to help us think through the topic. But beforehand, it's we just kind of we try to put ourselves in the mindset of someone who's not always may not be so deeply immersed in the art world and in that field, and do our best to try to understand how they would approach the exhibition.
This is something that I think about a lot, just, the legibility of art to the average person. And, where do we draw that line? Do we care about the line? I mean, obviously, some people care, some people don't. That's fine. I'm really a big believer in there should never be one way to do anything. But it is something that I think about a lot and wonder about, because I am, like you, so steeped in this visual language, but I'm always sort of curious, about how someone who is not is experiencing something that I may really love, what they're getting from it, how they're reading it. So anyway, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that you guys worked with the education department, but of course that makes so much sense. Let's talk about acquisitions, because, I think for a lot of artists, this is just completely baffling. And it's sometimes baffling to me. And I obviously deal with curators quite a bit. But what is the process? I mean, I think one thing that most people don't realize is that there are trustees involved. It's a big process to acquire. It's not just a curator saying, I love this and we're going to buy it. So, maybe you could talk us through it.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple, there are numerous parts to an acquisitions process, but kind of the beginning phase is kind of identifying, like, what are your collecting priorities? What are the areas where the collection is already strong? What are some of the, how can you build on those strengths? What are the areas where, there's kind of a gap in that narrative that you're trying to build about, in my case, the history of photography? And then figuring out what do we want to add? Where do we want to fill things in? Where do we want to add more depth? And that is often aligned, it's often aligned with exhibitions. We want to be able to show the collection. So we'll, acquire work often with the intention of showing it. It forms the foundation of an exhibition, or we'll do an exhibition hoping that we'll be able to acquire something out of that show. But kind of once we figure out what it is we want to buy, we then have to figure out how to pay for it.
Right.
So some departments have endowments where there's been a pile of money that's set aside and it's invested, and every year there's a certain amount of money that fund generates, and those funds are then used to purchase the artwork. Oftentimes we have to ask our patrons if they will give us the money to support an acquisition. So
talk a little bit about those patrons, because I think you'd be surprised how little people know about what you're talking about there.
Yeah, they're people of means, but they're people who love art, who love the museum, and who want to share that love with other people. So they give us money to run the museum and to build the collection. They're business people.
And you meet regularly, or right? I mean, you all get together to talk about what's going on.
Yeah, we have they're often board members. So, people
Right.
and the board is there, one, to financially support the museum, but also to help kind of guide the museum and preserve its legacy and make sure that it, continues on in perpetuity. So we have, board meetings fairly regularly. And then there are different committees on the board. Like there's a committee for collections, and they approve all of our acquisitions. There are committees for exhibitions. There are committees for
How big are the
finance.
committees?
The committees are anywhere from, I would say, 10 to 20 people. I think that the board at the high is around 60 people, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
So that's a lot of people to try and it's a little bit of herding cats, I would think, trying to get that amount of people to agree on an acquisition.
It can be. For the most part, though, once a curator has gone through the process of, identifying the acquisition, and they've researched the provenance if that's necessary, and they've put together the funding to purchase it, and we then have to write out what's called a justification. So we basically make a sales pitch for what is this work, why is it important, where does it fit in our collection, why should we have it, and you make a case, you make an argument for why we should be adding the work to the collection. And I should say we've been talking mostly about purchases up to this point, but we also, most of the work that comes into the collection is a gift, either from a collector or from an artist.
I'm going to get to that.
So there's like we buy artwork. We don't buy a lot of artwork,
right?
But we are given a lot of artwork. But we also have to go through the same process when we're given the artwork, because we're charged with caring for that artwork. As long as the artwork and the museum exist. And so we don't take just anything, because we have to find a place for it in storage. We have to make sure that it, isn't going to be degraded. We also, of course, we want to show it. We want to make it accessible to the public. So it's a big responsibility. And so it's something that we take seriously.
Well, let me just underline that for a second for the listeners, most of whom are artists, because I know that often artists don't understand. Sometimes artists want to gift prints to a museum because they have a relationship with the museum, or they think their work fits with the museum, and they want that in their bio, on their CV, that their work is collected at a specific museum. And the museum isn't interested, even if it's free, and this can be confusing, but you just answered it. So I just want to underline that. It's it is a responsibility. So whether you're paying for it or not, you're not just a deposit for random work.
Yeah, we don't want to take something into the collection that's just going to languish in storage and no one's ever going to see it. It may not be shown immediately. We have right now around 8,500 photographs in the collection, which is a lot of photographs. It's relatively small for a lot of museums that are the size of the High Museum, but it's still a very large number of photographs. And our galleries right now, we can, depending on the size, we can fit around 100 photographs on the walls at any given time. So not everything is going to get shown, and not everything is going to get shown right away. But we want to make sure that we take something that actually fits our collection, that we think we can, that has some value, not just financial value, because essentially once it comes into the collection, it doesn't really matter what it's worth. It's it's an educational tool. It's something there to elicit an aesthetic experience. So we don't really think so much about the financial value on that side, but there are expenses, because we have climate controlled storage. We have to mat things. We have to frame things. We have to find
and you're not hoarders. I mean, you're not trying to hoard just the most photographs you can. So no. Let's go, because this is I think really fascinating part of museum acquisitions are the gifts, whether they're sort of made in piecemeal or whether a collector is bequeathing their entire collection either when they get older or once they pass on. But let's talk about that, because it is really fascinating. I mean, those are those little labels where you see, a gift a gift of or a gift by so and so, and
Yeah,
which is very common, obviously.
it is. Yeah, it's the bulk of the collection. Has been given to the museum by collectors and artists of of all stripes. So that happens in a few ways. Sometimes there are collectors who are building fairly large collections, and they work closely with the curators because they want the curators' advice. We're we're experts in the field, such as it is, and they want to know kind of what we think is important work, is worthy work, and so they work with us to build their collections, and that's something that we do not just out of the goodness of our hearts, even though we often really like these people. There's also some expectation that at some point some or all of their collection will eventually be donated to the museum, and so we kind of advise them on how to build that collection. Sometimes people will also, a lot of people that we work with have their own instincts, they have their own tastes, and they build a collection themselves, and we'll get to know them, and they'll offer to give it to us, or we'll ask them if they can give some or all of it to us. It's a lot about cultivating these relationships. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious what happens. I mean, are you ever in a position where someone wants to give you their collection and you don't want it, or you have to say, well, we don't want all of it, but because we don't like that? Obviously you're not going to say that, but you're sort of have to hold that back and just go in and pick out what you do want. And does that hurt people's feelings? Do they feel stung by that if you're not interested in taking everything they want to give you?
With people who have had a longer relationship with the museum and they can understand how the museum works,
right?
They tend to know that we're not always interested in everything, because we'll get approached by people who they have a collection, they're downsizing their home, or they're just they don't want it anymore. Sometimes they sold a business and they need a tax write-off, and so this is they can get a tax write-off for donating the artwork to the museum. But some people know that we can't take everything, and there are a number of reasons why we wouldn't take everything. Sometimes it's just not in very good condition. The photograph's been on display too long, and it's faded, or it wasn't stored properly, and it's maybe oxidized, or there's mold growing on it, or something like that. It has a condition issue. Sometimes we already have that exact photograph or something very similar in the photograph. We don't necessarily need another one. So that would be a reason why we would decline it. Sometimes it just doesn't fit with our collection. The High doesn't have a very large collection of Asian art, for example. So if someone approached us and said, I have a collection of Asian ceramics, I'd like to donate those to the High, we would, in all likelihood, and this isn't my area, so I can't really speak with great authority on that.
Yeah.
I don't see that fitting in with our collection. We don't have a department of Asian art. We don't have it just doesn't fit within the
right.
context.
Yep.
So if it doesn't fit with the collection we have, or it isn't substantial enough to actually build a new strength in the collection, it's just it'll be kind of an odd outlier. So we would try to help them find another institution where it would fit and have them donate it there. Some people, they take all of it and do with it what you want afterward. And,
so do you put it up
keep
for
what
auction?
you want. Sometimes we do. I mean, that's a process called deaccessioning, where we take something that's in the collection and we sell it either at auction, or we consign it with a dealer, or we give it to another museum that's maybe more appropriate for their collection. But it's a long process, because there are very strict guidelines that the American Alliance of Museums and other professional organizations have specified what you can and can't do with your collection and when you sell it. You can't sell objects from your collection simply to fund your general operating budget. That's a huge no-no in the field, because we're charged with preserving these objects and caring for these objects in the public trust. And so if we're thinking about them as assets, and when we fall on hard times, we're just unloading the assets to keep the doors open and salaries paid, that kind of undermines the whole principle of caring for the artwork. So when we do deaccession things, we have to have a very good reason for it. It doesn't fit, it's a duplicate, the condition is bad, things of that nature. Same reason why we would maybe not accept something in the first place, the reason why we would get it out of the collection. But tastes change, priorities change, so you kind of have to periodically refine the collection. But it's a lot of work, so it's not something that's entered into lightly.
Do museums have, you mentioned maybe giving the work to another museum, and you briefly sort of touched on shows going from one museum to another with the Paul Graham show. Do museums have particularly strong relationships with specific other museums? Like, so does the High have almost like best friend museums, or that it wants to play with the most, play dates?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean,
and is that just personal, like because you have a strong relationship with someone at, Art Institute Chicago or Museum of Contemporary Photography Chicago, because that's where you came from? Or is it more sort of institutionalized relationships?
It's both. Sometimes museums have shared interests and shared priorities, and so we'll organize shows together, or one museum will be organizing a show that seems appealing to another museum, and so then it'll travel there. But then there's also there are a lot of professional relationships that curators and directors have with each other at museums, and there are people who you work well with, you like the way that they think, the way that they approach a particular project. They're just good people to work with, and you enjoy that professional process of collaboration. So yeah, I mean, it's rarely all that formalized, though. I've had a few conversations with other curators about putting together some kind of consortium of these kind of smaller to mid-size museums with photography collections, and because we all generate so many shows, and oftentimes they just go up in our museum and then they come down,
right?
Why not?
Share,
why not circulate them around?
Yeah,
and we've never really gotten that off the ground in a
it's a great
formal
idea.
way. But there are museums that the High, that we tend to work with a lot. The High in particular, we've collaborated with the Art Institute of Chicago and the MFA Houston on a number of occasions. They're just they're not geographically all that close to us, so there's no overlap or very little overlap in terms of our audiences. But we're interested in similar things, and so there's mutual interest in those kinds of projects.
So before we wind down, tell me what you're working on right now, or I know you're working on more than one thing, but pick one that you're really excited about, and maybe describe where you are in the process.
The big project that I'm working on right now is an exhibition that looks back at the last 25 years of commissions that the High has done. This project called Picturing the South. So in 1996, when Atlanta hosted the Olympics, there were, the photography department at the High put on a big show called Picturing the South, which is a survey of photography in the region from the 1840s, to the present. And the curator at the time, Ellen Florov, wanted to make sure that show was as up to date as possible. So she commissioned Dawood Bey, Sally Mann, and Alex Webb to make new work in the South. And it was really an open-ended commission. They could photograph whatever they want, however they wanted.
Fantastic.
The only caveat was it had to be done in the South. I think at the time she may have asked them to photograph in Georgia, but it's since expanded. And so over the last 25 years, there have been 13 commissions that have been completed. And we've just, in the last year, launched 3 new commissions. But it's a really amazing project because it's so open-ended. It's opened up a lot of new avenues for artists. So, for example, Richard Mizrak created his project Cancer Alley or Petrochemical America, and it was one of the first times that he photographed outside the American West, and it turned into this massive body of work. And he ended up revisiting the project 10 years later. Alex Soth started a project that at the time was called Black Line of Woods, but turned into Broken Manual, which was a major body of work for him.
At the High. I actually saw that show.
I'm jealous. I wish I'd gotten to see that show. That was actually, so coincidentally, that was how I first heard about the High, was when that exhibition was announced. And who else? Like Sally Mann started, she'd been kind of dabbling in landscape at the time. and working with experimental processes. But when she got this commission, it really solidified that direction for her work, which she,
it's
a lot of ways is
fantastic.
still working on. But
Yeah.
right now, Jim Goldberg, Anmi Lay, and Sheila Pre-Bright are making new work
Wow.
for the
How
commissions.
exciting. Yeah.
So the idea is, to celebrate this project and bring all of the work together, because we have close to 300 photographs that have been made through the Picture in the South commissions in our collection.
Yeah.
So we'll show all of these bodies of work in as much depth as we can at the museum. So it'll essentially be 16 concurrent small-scale solo exhibitions that are all connected by the fact that they were made in the South and they were commissioned by the High Museum, but they're all self-contained, discrete bodies of work. And it's some really amazing work has been done through this. So now,
when will that be? When will that exhibition happen?
It opens November 5th of this year, 2021.
Wow. I think people should plan a trip to Atlanta.
Come to Atlanta.
To see that. I love Atlanta, so I'll come down and see it because I love to see you. I love the museum. And as someone who loves to eat, Atlanta is a great eating city. Fantastic.
You are welcome anytime.
Thank you. I will definitely be there because that sounds, that show is going to be right in my happy zone as far as, type of work. But that is super exciting. You must be having a blast doing it.
It's been great. I mean, I've gotten to interview all of the artists who have
Oh my God, how fun.
I've done a commission. We were supposed to be traveling all over the country to interview them in person, but because of the pandemic, we've been doing it online. But even so, getting to sit down with, with Alec or, Richard Mizrak or, Dawood Bey for an hour and just talk photography is,
oh my God.
It's a dream come true.
Oh my God. That is fantastic. I'm very jealous. Oh my God. How fun. Wow. And what will you do where will that text appear, those interviews?
So we're
How will they
actually
be integrated.
We're going to be making a video, actually a series of videos that will be included in the exhibition. So there'll be one longer video kind of about the commission series in general, with all the artists talking about the commissions and kind of how the commission influenced their work and how it kind of shaped what they did, and also just the work that they made. And then we'll also have that in the exhibition, but we're also putting together, we're calling it an online publication, but it's essentially a kind of robust, focused website. And so we'll have individual videos about each of the artists up on this website, along with,
and might there be
text
a book?
And archival materials. There isn't going to be a book specifically about the Picture in the South commissions, but we do have a book in the works about the broader sweep of photography in the South. So we're revisiting that original Picturing the South idea and updating it. And so all of the commissions will be integrated into that arc. And I'll be writing something about the commission series for that book, but that won't come out until 2023.
Well, this all sounds amazing. I mean, just super fun and exciting. And
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, one last question, just because I'm dying of curiosity to ask you this. How many, do you just get constant emails from people like me? Do art dealers just drive you guys crazy trying to get you to buy work all the time? You be honest.
Be honest. Most of you guys are pretty courteous and thoughtful in the way when you email us. But yeah, I mean, I get.
Is it a barrage?
I must get 3 to 10 emails from galleries every day.
Oh my God.
I mean, but a lot of them, they're just like the regular routine mailings. And then, I get a handful of week that are specific to me, or I've got this new show, thought you might be interested. Here's the checklist.
Yeah.
Things that are a little bit more focused, but it's generally not annoying because it's sometimes helpful to be reminded, what's going on. It's very easy to get stuck in your own little bubble, working on your projects and, plugging away at, your research and writing your justifications and your exhibition texts and, dealing with the other day-to-day museum tasks. So sometimes it's nice to get a reminder to be, get pulled out of that. But, the same is artists, email me all the time as well. And it's usually, very welcome to just, hear what someone's working on. So I
Nice
I enjoy that
political
correspondence
answer.
usually.
Do you, is there pressure as a curator to, I mean, it's funny to ask this after what we just talked about the picturing the South, but do you feel pressure to sort of discover new, whether it's new form or new subject, or, where is that pressure? Where does it sit with a curator at a contemporary museum?
I would say that more that I put that pressure on myself because I'm interested in where is the field going? Where's what are the new ways that people are working with photography? And I also want to be supportive of artists and give them a platform and help them find an audience. So I'm really interested in kind of what's new and what's next. But it's not the only thing that I do, and it's not the only thing that I'm interested in. The history of the medium is most of what I end up working with. So I don't know that I would say it's a pressure. I would say that it's like, it's a draw. It's there's a lot of excitement around that, but it's also, it's balanced with, what don't we know about these artists who we think we know so well, or what do we have in our collection that maybe has been shown before, but with 20 years hindsight on that work, maybe we have a different perspective on it, and we want to present it in a different way. Or maybe it's just like, this is just great work. You've seen it, know it, but look at it again because it's just so incredible. You should spend some time with it again, even though you think you know it.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for, hanging out with me today, and you were just, so game for, sort of letting us peek behind the proverbial curtain and get a sense of how things work. And I'm quite sure that a lot of listeners just don't know these things. So I think it's super valuable, and really, it's great to have these things sort of demystified. And there's no reason for a lot of these things to be secrets, whether it's what I do or what you do. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to share all of this. And, I'm really honored that you asked me on to talk about these things.
Well, thank you. And maybe what we'll do is, maybe we'll do another episode when the show opens. I really do want to see that show, and I'm always looking for an excuse to go to Atlanta, a city I really do love. So thank you so much, and I will talk to you again soon.
Great. Thanks, Sasha.
Okay. Bye, Greg.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. You can hear PhotoWork on all your favorite podcast platforms. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, and be sure to subscribe on any one of those services or wherever you listen to podcasts.